John Lennon's glasses fell off during Imagine. His reaction had 25,000 people singing. It was supposed to be just another concert, another night, another crowd. But when John Lennon's glasses slipped from his face during the most important song of his career, 25,000 people witnessed something that would haunt them forever. Madison Square Garden, October 19th, 1975. The air was thick with anticipation and cigarette smoke. Outside, New York City pulsed with the chaos of a nation still healing from Vietnam, still questioning everything it once believed. Inside, 25,000 souls had gathered for what they thought would be entertainment. They had no idea they were about to witness magic. John walked onto that stage carrying more than just his guitar. He carried the weight of a broken Beatles, the burden of being labeled a radical, the fear that maybe, just maybe, his message of peace was falling on deaf ears in a world gone mad. The opening songs had gone perfectly. Instant Karma brought the house down. Working Class Hero had the crowd singing every controversial word. But now came the moment John both craved and feared. Time for Imagine, the song that had made him a prophet to some, a target to others. The song that dared to ask 25,000 people to dream of a world without the very things they'd been taught to worship. As the opening piano notes filled the arena, something shifted in the air. Conversations stopped. Lighters flickered to life like tiny prayers. The rowdy New York crowd became something else entirely. They became believers. But John Lennon had no idea that in exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds, everything would change. That a simple accident would create the most powerful moment of his entire career. That his vulnerability would unlock something beautiful in 25,000 strangers. The song that challenged the world was about to challenge its creator in ways he never imagined. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John's fingers found the familiar keys. The opening chords of Imagine floated through Madison Square Garden like a prayer looking for believers. But this wasn't just any venue. This was New York City, the city that never sleeps, the city that had watched the Twin Towers rise into the sky, the city where dreams came to die as often as they came to life. These weren't just any people in the audience. These were Americans in 1975. They'd watched their boys come home from Vietnam in body bags. They'd seen a president resign in disgrace. They'd witnessed the Beatles break apart like their own childhood innocence. And here was John Lennon, the man who'd returned his MBE to the Queen, the man who'd married Yoko and scandalized the world, the man who'd been called a communist, a radical, a threat to American values, standing alone on stage, asking them to imagine. Imagine there's no heaven. The words hung in the air like smoke. Some people shifted uncomfortably. This was 1975 America. You didn't question heaven. You didn't question God. You especially didn't question these things in public. But John's voice was different tonight. More vulnerable, more human. Less the radical Beatle and more the man who'd grown up poor in Liverpool, who'd lost his mother too young, who'd spent years searching for something real in a world full of illusions. It's easy if you try. In the third row, Margaret O'Brien from Queens clutched her rosary beads. She'd come to hear Beatles songs. She hadn't come to have her faith questioned, but something in John's voice made her pause, made her listen instead of judge. In the balcony, Vietnam veteran Tommy Rodriguez felt tears he hadn't cried since Saigon. The line about no countries hit him like shrapnel. He'd bled for his country. His best friend had died for it. But sitting there in the dark, he found himself wondering, what if? No hell below us. John's voice cracked slightly on those words. People who knew him well would later say they heard something break in that moment. The weight of being John Lennon. The burden of carrying a message of peace in a world that seemed determined to destroy itself. His glasses, those famous round glasses that had become as much a part of his identity as his voice, began to slip down his nose. The stage lights were hot. The sweat was building. But John was lost in the song now, lost in the moment, reaching for something bigger than himself. Above us only sky. That's when it happened. The simple accident that would create the most beautiful moment of the night. The moment that would prove that sometimes the most powerful performances happen when everything goes wrong. The glasses slipped. Not dramatically, not with fanfare or cosmic significance. Just a simple slip of metal and glass down the bridge of a sweating nose. John Lennon's famous round glasses, the ones that had become as iconic as his voice, tumbled from his face and clattered onto the stage floor just as he reached the chorus of Imagine. For a split second, time stopped. John blinked in the harsh stage lights, suddenly half-blind, suddenly vulnerable in a way that 25,000 people had never seen him before. The man who'd challenged the world with his music, who'd stood up to governments and critics and haters, was suddenly just a myopic guy from Liverpool, squinting into the darkness. The piano continued playing. His hands knew the chords by muscle memory. But his voice faltered. Not because he'd forgotten the words. John Lennon could sing Imagine in his sleep. He'd written those lyrics with his own blood and dreams and desperate hope for a better world. His voice faltered because for the first time in years, he couldn't see his audience. And that changed everything. Without his glasses, the 25,000 faces became a blur. The critics and the believers, the protesters and the patriots, the young and the old, they all became one indistinct mass of humanity. In the darkness beyond the stage lights, John couldn't see the conservative businessman in Section 12 who'd been dragged to the concert by his teenage daughter. Couldn't see the way the man's stern expression had softened during the opening verse. Couldn't see the group of nuns from Brooklyn who'd somehow ended up in the fourth row, their habits stark white against the dark arena. Couldn't see how they'd been listening with an attention usually reserved for Sunday sermons. Couldn't see Tommy Rodriguez in the balcony, the Vietnam vet whose hands had stopped shaking for the first time in months. All John could see was light and shadows and the suggestion of people. But sometimes that's exactly what you need to see the truth. Imagine all the people. His voice came back stronger now. Not because he'd found his glasses. They still lay on the stage floor, forgotten. But because he'd found something else, something he'd lost somewhere between the fame and the controversy and the constant weight of being John Lennon. He'd found his humanity, and in that moment of vulnerability, something magical began to happen in Madison Square Garden. Something that would be talked about for decades. Something that would change how people thought about music, about connection, about the power of imperfection. The audience began to sing. Not the usual concert sing-along, not the half-hearted mumbling of people who sort of knew the words. This was different. This was 25,000 people becoming one voice, one prayer, one impossible dream made manifest in the darkness of a New York arena. But the real magic was just beginning. Without his glasses, John Lennon could hear things he'd never heard before. The tremor in the voice of the businessman from Section 12. The pure, clear soprano of one of the Brooklyn nuns. The broken baritone of the Vietnam veteran who was singing through tears he didn't know he was crying. Living for today. The lyrics took on new meaning when you couldn't see who was singing them. When race and class and politics and prejudice became invisible. When 25,000 different people became one human voice, reaching for something better. John's fingers found the keys with new purpose. His voice grew stronger, not weaker, without the visual distraction of faces and judgments and expectations. He began to hear the song the way he'd written it, not as a political statement or a controversial challenge to religious authority, but as a simple hope, a whispered prayer for a world where people could just be. Together, in the darkness beyond the stage lights, something unprecedented was happening. Margaret O'Brien from Queens, the Catholic woman who'd clutched her rosary beads during the opening verse, found herself singing the words about no religion too, not because she'd lost her faith, but because she'd found something bigger than denomination, something that connected her to the Puerto Rican family next to her, the black teenager in front of her, the elderly Jewish man behind her. They were all singing the same words, the same hope, the same impossible dream. Dami Rodriguez in the balcony felt something he hadn't felt since before Vietnam. Peace. Not the absence of war, but the presence of connection. The knowledge that he wasn't alone in his pain, his hope, his desperate desire for a world that made sense. The businessman from Section 12 found himself thinking about his teenage daughter, who had begged him to come, about the way she looked at the world with such hope, such belief that things could be better. For the first time, he understood why she loved this music, this message. And on stage, John Lennon made a decision that would echo through music history. He left his glasses on the floor, not as a theatrical gesture, not as a planned moment of vulnerability, but because he discovered something powerful in that blindness, something that vision had been obscuring. When you can't see the differences between people, you can hear their similarity. When you can't judge by appearance, you can connect through sound, through shared breath, through the universal language of music and hope. Imagine all the people living life in peace. The chorus swelled now, 25,000 voices strong. But it wasn't chaos. It wasn't the cacophony you'd expect from an unplanned, unrehearsed mass sing-along. It was harmony. Somehow, without planning or practice or sheet music, 25,000 strangers had found a way to sing together, to blend their voices into something beautiful, something unified, something that sounded like John's impossible dream made real. But the most powerful moment was still to come. The song was ending, but nobody wanted it to end. John's fingers slowed on the piano. His voice grew softer. The natural conclusion of Imagine was approaching, and everyone in Madison Square Garden could feel it. But something was happening that had never happened before at a John Lennon concert, or any concert, for that matter. The audience wasn't stopping, even as John's voice faded, even as the piano notes grew sparse and tentative. 25,000 people kept singing, kept believing, kept imagining. You may say I'm a dreamer. The words floated through the arena now, without accompaniment. Just human voices. Just breathe and hope, and the shared belief that music could, for at least a few minutes, create the world they were singing about. John stopped playing entirely. He sat at the piano, his glasses still on the floor, his vision still blurred, and listened to 25,000 people sing his song back to him. Not as fans singing along to a performance, but as believers sharing a prayer. And in that moment, something broke inside John Lennon. Not broke like damaged, broke like a dam breaking, like a wall falling down, like the barriers between performer and audience, between dream and reality, between John the radical and John the human being, simply dissolving. He began to cry, not the gentle tears of artistic emotion, not the calculated vulnerability of a planned moment. John Lennon broke down completely, sitting at that piano in front of 25,000 people, sobbing like a child, because he could hear it now. The thing he'd been trying to create his entire career, the unity he'd dreamed of when he wrote those words in his Tittenhurst Park mansion, the peace he'd marched for, protested for, sacrificed his relationship with Paul McCartney for. It was real. For 3 minutes and 47 seconds in Madison Square Garden on October 19, 1975, John Lennon's impossible dream was real. But I'm not the only one. The audience kept singing, their voices growing stronger as John's grew weaker with emotion. They were carrying the song now, carrying the dream, carrying him. And John realized something that would change him forever. He wasn't the dreamer singing to the world. He was part of the world, dreaming together. The glasses on the floor had revealed more than his myopia. They'd revealed the truth about music, about connection, about the power of vulnerability to create something beautiful. But as the final notes faded into silence, as 25,000 people stood in ovation, not just for John, but for themselves, for what they'd created together, one question remained. How do you follow a moment like that? How do you return to the world of vision and judgment and separation after you've experienced unity? How do you put your glasses back on when blindness has shown you the light? The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of breath held in wonder, full of hearts beating in unexpected rhythm, full of the knowledge that 25,000 strangers had just become something else entirely. John sat at the piano, tears still streaming down his face, his famous glasses still lying forgotten on the stage floor. In the blur of stage lights and human shadows, he could see movement, the suggestion of people, the outline of connection. But he couldn't see the details that usually divided them, couldn't see the color of skin or the style of clothes or the lines that marked age and class, and all the other barriers that kept people apart. All he could see was the essence of humanity, breathing together in the darkness. And he made a choice that no one, not even his closest friends, had expected. He spoke into the microphone, his voice still rough with emotion. I can't see you. I lost my glasses and I can't see a single one of your faces right now. The arena remained silent, hanging on every word. But you know what? I can hear you. I can feel you. And maybe that's better. John stood up from the piano, leaving the glasses where they'd fallen. He walked to the edge of the stage, squinting into the lights, reaching toward an audience he couldn't see, but could somehow sense with perfect clarity. They tell us we're supposed to look at each other and see the differences, see the reasons we can't get along, the reasons we can't trust each other, the reasons we can't live in peace. His voice grew stronger, more certain. But when I can't see you, when all I can do is hear your voices singing together, you know what I hear? I hear the same thing. I hear people who want the same things: love, peace, hope, understanding. In section 12, the businessman felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd been keeping locked away since his own teenage years, when he'd believed in things like peace and love before the world taught him to be practical. In the fourth row, the nuns from Brooklyn exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They'd come expecting to disapprove. They'd found instead a sermon about unity that rivaled anything they'd heard in church. In the balcony, Tommy Rodriguez realized his hands had stopped shaking entirely. For the first time since Vietnam, he felt calm. "I want to try something," John said, his voice now carrying clearly through the arena. "I want to sing Imagine one more time, but this time I want us to sing it together from the beginning, not as performer and audience, not as John Lennon and his fans, but as people, just people imagining a better world." He walked back to the piano, still leaving his glasses on the floor. "And I want to stay like this, without my glasses, without the ability to see what makes us different, because maybe, just maybe, that's the only way to really see what makes us the same. What happened next had never happened before in the history of rock and roll, would never happen again quite the same way. 25,000 people began Imagine together, not following John's lead, but singing with him as equals, creating something that belonged to all of them. And John Lennon, the man who'd spent years trying to change the world with his music, discovered that sometimes the world changes you instead. The second performance of Imagine that night lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes of 25,000 people singing together. 11 minutes of harmony created not by training or practice, but by simple human connection. 11 minutes that redefined what music could be. When it finally ended, when the last voice faded and the final piano note hung in the air like incense, John Lennon did something that surprised everyone in Madison Square Garden. He picked up his glasses, but he didn't put them on. Instead, he held them up to the light, studying them as if seeing them for the first time. "You know," he said into the microphone, his voice thoughtful now, reflective, "I've been wearing glasses since I was a kid. Can't see 2 feet in front of me without them. Always thought that made me weak. Always thought clear vision was the most important thing." He looked out at the audience, still a blur of humanity in the darkness. "But tonight, you taught me something. Sometimes the clearest vision comes when we stop looking with our eyes and start seeing with our hearts." John put his glasses back on. The world snapped into focus. 25,000 individual faces, different ages, races, backgrounds. The divisions and differences that usually filled him with the desperate need to preach unity and peace. But something had changed. The glasses couldn't erase what had happened in those minutes of blindness, couldn't separate what had been unified, couldn't make him forget what 25,000 voices sounded like when they sang as one. "I'm going to put these back on now," John said, settling the familiar frames on his nose. "Because I need to see you. I need to remember your faces. But I also need to remember what it felt like not to see the things that divide us." He paused, looking out at the crowd with new eyes. Same prescription, different vision. We all wear glasses, don't we? Maybe not on our faces, but in our hearts. Glasses that help us see differences instead of similarities. Glasses that focus on what separates us instead of what connects us. The arena was silent again, but it was a different silence than before. Not the silence of anticipation, but the silence of understanding, of people thinking about their own invisible glasses. Tonight, for just a few minutes, we all took off those glasses together. And you know what we saw? Or maybe what we didn't see. John smiled, and even through the stage lights in the distance, people could see that something fundamental had changed in him. We saw that John Lennon's impossible dream isn't impossible at all. It's just waiting for us to stop looking at what makes us different and start hearing what makes us the same. He stood up from the piano for the last time that night. "Thank you for teaching me how to see without seeing. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the most important vision is the one that happens when we close our eyes and open our hearts." The ovation that followed lasted 18 minutes. But it wasn't just applause for a performance. It was gratitude for a revelation, for a moment when music became something bigger than entertainment, for proof that 25,000 strangers could become one voice, one dream, one impossible hope made real. John Lennon walked off stage that night wearing his glasses but carrying a different kind of vision. The knowledge that the world he'd imagined wasn't a dream at all. It was a choice to see with hearts instead of eyes, to hear similarity instead of difference, to believe that peace wasn't impossible. It was just invisible to those wearing the wrong kind of glasses. The glasses fell off during Imagine that night, but what John Lennon found in that blindness was the clearest vision of his life, and maybe, just maybe, the clearest vision any of us can have. The vision of what we look like when we stop looking at each other and start seeing ourselves. The bootleg recording of that October 19th performance became legendary among collectors, not for its technical quality, but for capturing the 11-minute version of Imagine, the one where 25,000 people discovered they could see perfectly in the dark. John Lennon never performed Imagine the same way again. Some say he never took his vision for granted again either. The glasses are on display at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But the real vision they revealed? That lives on every time someone chooses to see with their heart instead of their eyes. Every time someone imagines.